Hey everyone, it's Davy Mooney coming to you from the University of North Texas, where I run the jazz guitar program. Benedetto artist, Sunnyside Records artist. Got my 4 Sunnyside CDs here, and Way Back is coming out June 9th. I'm working on some gigs to promote the thing when it comes out, like we used to do in the old days, back when there was international travel, things like that. It's coming back. That's what Way Back is about. We're finding a way back. Got my 2 Mel Bay books, Personalizing Jazz Vocabulary and Into the Labyrinth. And yeah, we're just getting back from spring break over here. I had a very unfortunate, I was all ready to go travel. We were going to Marfa, Texas, Big Bend National Park. And then Friday, before spring break, I started feeling bad, and then I tested positive for COVID round 2. And it's no fun. I don't recommend it, y'all. And so if I have a little brain foggy moments in this video, please forgive me. But I wanted to talk about, I've been thinking about doing this video for a long time, something a little different than talking about a specific tune. I want to talk about comping. And as always, it's a very personal thing. And I guess I have a variety of techniques and things that I've worked out over the years that work for me, and people seem to enjoy when I comp for them. But you know, there's some overarching principles, but just a variety of techniques and approaches that I've hammered out over the years, trial and error really. And I think a lot of my students, I just get the question over and over again. They get in these situations where they're in a small group, and either there's the issue of, okay, there's already a piano in the group, which is a separate thing, but when there's no piano and they're the primary comping instrument, and say there's 3 horn players, and it's a lot of responsibility. And as guitar players, I think it's fair to say that it's a little bit harder to fill that role, just because piano is sort of the default. And piano's, I think, just it's a percussion instrument, you know. It makes sense to lock into the groove and the tempo with this kind of motion, I think, a little more than this, whatever we're doing over here. 2 hands doing different things. So what do we mean comping? Well, we're accompanying the soloist. And I'd say one overarching principle is that I like to think of comping the way as a sort of Hippocratic oath of do no harm, right? You don't want to be the center. This is all my personal thoughts about this stuff. So there are other philosophies that are valid. But I don't want to be the center of attention when I comp. If I'm drawing attention away from the soloist, I feel like I'm doing it wrong. And I remember, part of my evolution on this topic was involved going through, listening back to myself comping on different gigs and different records. And I never felt like, if I'd only comped more, it was always like, oh man, why did I play that much stuff? And I'm distracting from the soloist. And some of it, is as many things in jazz, it gets to be a head game. And it's like, maybe it's fine and I'm just listening to myself because it's me, whereas a normal person would be listening to the soloist and wouldn't necessarily. But anyway, I'm more happy now with my playing, soloing, by doing that, by focusing on doing no harm to the person that's playing. And I think my favorite, I can talk about this forever, and I'll demonstrate some things too, but my favorite records is kind of examples of comping guitar, well, just comping in general, but guitar comping too. One, in general, Herbie Hancock on the 1964 concert, My Funny Valentine, and specifically his comping behind George Coleman. And the way, because by that point, usually on those tunes, they're in a double time feel, like a medium swing, kind of on the ballads. I like how he waits for his spots on that record. When George Coleman is playing, he kind of riffs behind him, interacts with the drums. He's in there. He's part of the drum kit. He's like a snare drum or a second snare drum. And then when George Coleman takes a little breath and stops, Herbie does some little commentary. Do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do. And there's all these magical moments on those records that it's really great stuff. And another record, guitar player record that I love a lot is Joe Henderson, So Near, So Far, with Scofield and Al Foster and Dave Holland. And on that record, I like what Scofield does, and I also like what he doesn't does. Excuse me, I'll see that's that brain. But that's a good one. I like what he does and what he doesn't does. What he doesn't do, there are long stretches where he kind of doesn't play at all, because especially on, I mean, it's a very long record, but I'm thinking of No Blues, and where there's a ton of interaction between the drums and the saxophone, and the bass is pretty active as well. And so rather than get in there and play a bunch of stuff and crowd up the remaining space, such as it is, he kind of lays back and lets them do their thing. And it's a blues. It's not like he needs to give the saxophone the chord so he knows what chord to play, Joe Henderson. So that's a good, great record. I show that one to my students. And there's many others, but those are some good examples. So speaking of medium swing, like on 64 concert, in terms of, okay, well, what are the actual rhythms that we use to comp? Or what are the grooves, or what are some sort of claves that we can play off of? And for this, I got to give a shout out to the great Aaron Goldberg, pianist, and he did a workshop at the University of New Orleans right before I moved here, so maybe 2016, maybe early 2017. And you know, I've been listening to him for years. I remember when he came down to New Orleans in the 90s after he'd recorded Roots, Branches, and Leaves, the John Ellis record. I think it was the 90s, maybe early 2000s. Anyway, but he talked about, you know, a couple very sort of obvious rhythms and grooves that people play off, or like the Charleston, you know. It's supposed to be like Stella by Starlight Charleston. Where you have one and the and of two, right? And another one he pointed out, like I knew that, you know, everybody knows the Charleston, is a thing that Red Garland does a lot on when he played with Miles, and I think in other contexts, where he's basically playing the and of two and the and of four. And you can really hear this, like on his solo on Bye Bye Blackbird, on Round About Midnight, where Red Garland, like, he'll do this for the whole solo, where he's just like... keeps it going for a long time. Sometimes behind other soloists he'll go. He'll do stuff like da da da, and then go back to it. And that's actually really hard to do in a groove and not sort of speed up with all those upbeats. Sometimes I'll practice that, or have students do that just with a metronome. And that's kind of a go-to. Something I'll go to, especially if the rhythm section feels a little funny at the beginning of someone's solo. I'll just try to maybe, if appropriate, again, do no harm. So it's always situational. But those are a couple rhythms, and I remember Aaron pointing out that Herbie has both, obviously, I think everyone comping has those rhythms in their playing, but he would vary up the lengths of things, make certain things longer and certain things shorter. So why don't I try to demonstrate what I might do. So I'm going to play over a track, Stella by Starlight track, it's just the I reel, and just bass and drums. And so I'm going to try to imagine that there's a solo going on. So it's a little funny to demonstrate comping when there's no one to comp for. Then again, you know, like I said, I'm going to try to imagine a type of solo that I could provide comping for, and again, not be the center of attention, although of course I am the center of attention. So let's see what happens. And then maybe I'll talk about some of the voicings and other things that I use. So here's a little Stella. So yeah, I was trying to imagine a solo, and maybe even imagine the places where I could do a little commentary on something that happened in my head, you know. It's important to listen for those spaces. You know, when I think about interaction, I remember at the Monk Institute we would sort of obsess over this. Oh gosh, sorry, I had a little flashback there. But one way to think about interaction is not necessarily that I'm trying to like mimic everything the soloist is doing and kind of crowd them with, like, they play something and I go based on what they play. But like I said, trying to listen closely enough to where I can sort of anticipate where they're going to pause in what they do. And that's my spot, to play just a little something that maybe then they'll get an idea from. And that's one way to do it, of course. Again, that's a strategy that I use. It keeps me engaged so I don't space out. It's very easy, you know, in the course of a performance, you know, especially say you're playing a whole gig and you're going to comp for so many different solos, and you want to stay engaged with what's going on. So in terms of some of the voicings I'm using, that was Stella by Starlight. So sometimes if there's a bass player, the collection of voicings that I use are very personal, like everything else, you know. And I just have a bunch of different grips that I've come up with over the years. Or in a certain sense, it's like, so instead of playing this chord, maybe, which is a E minor 7 flat 5 with the 11 on top, I might just play like the top part of it, or even like 2 notes of it, which I kind of got from like your Scofield, Frizzell kind of comping thing. Those are just pieces of chords without the roots, because the bass is playing the root. And I like to voice lead a fair amount, you know, have some kind of a melody note on top. Again, I'm thinking about doing no harm and not crowding out the soloist, but at the same time I want to kind of stay engaged and feel like I'm composing a little something. So that's always in my mind, you know, the idea that these are just pieces of chords that you might play. That's one that I use a lot. You know, I used to, I remember when I was younger, if the chord was like an E flat 7, I didn't want to have this interval in it that's sort of sus that also has the major third. And now I kind of like it, because one, it's easier to play, and I can voice lead if I'm going from D minor to like E flat 7 instead of by Starlight. I'd rather do that than go, it's kind of like the sound of that chord, and if I try to do that, it just hurts my hand. So, plus you can get D minor, E flat 9, and then F major. Yeah, and another thing that I remember John Scofield pointed out to me when we were at the Monk Institute. Again, I was doing a lot of over-comping and overplaying and trying to follow. I think the saxophone player was playing a lot very like angular, like, you know, intense saxophonic solo, and I was trying to be in there in the same. I was playing all this stuff and very staccato. And I remember John Scofield was there, and he was like, Dave, look at this. And he just played like, I think it was a D minor 7 or something like that, and just let it ring to kind of show me that, you know, sometimes I like to vary up the longs and shorts of what I'm doing. You know, just like with phrasing, you know, it's good to have long phrases, short phrases. When you're comping, you want short chords, long chords. It's like Morse code to make it intelligible. So how about, you know, I could talk about this stuff forever. How about a faster tempo? Sometimes the tempo will change what you do a little bit. So how about, what is this thing called Love? Because that's a song that's like a real jam session-y song. I got it about 240. I don't want to get too carried away with the tempo, but let's see what I do. Again, I'm going to imagine a solo happening
Thank you.